The HOA president stood at my front gate with a smug smile as police officers placed handcuffs on my wrists and led me away from my own property. But what she didn't know was that the legal battle she had just started would eventually land on the desk of someone she never expected, and the moment the connection was revealed, her confidence would disappear faster than anyone thought possible. It started on what should have been a normal Tuesday morning. I was standing near the entrance gate of my property waiting for a delivery truck carrying supplies for a renovation project. The gate had been there for years, and everything about the property was fully legal and properly documented. As I checked my phone, I noticed a black SUV slowly approaching from down the street. The vehicle stopped nearby, and out stepped Karen, the president of our HOA. Accompanied by 2 board members, their expressions immediately told me this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. Karen marched straight toward me, carrying a thick folder stuffed with papers, and without even greeting me demanded that I open the gate and allow her access to inspect the property. I politely informed her that she had no right to enter without proper notice or permission, and that any requests could be submitted in writing instead of accepting the answer. She became visibly irritated and insisted that the HOA had authority to inspect CT whenever it wanted. I calmly explained that wasn't true and repeated that she would need to follow legal procedures. Several neighbors began paying attention as the discussion grew louder, and before long people were standing on driveways and sidewalks, watching the confrontation unfold. Karen seemed determined to make an example out of me, and the more she spoke, the more obvious it became that she wasn't interested in resolving anything. She simply wanted control. The argument continued for nearly 20 minutes before Karen suddenly pulled out her phone and stepped away to make a call. When she returned, her expression had changed completely. She looked confident, almost excited, as if she had just secured a victory. I asked what was going on, but she ignored the question and informed me that law enforcement would be arriving shortly. According to her, I was interfering with HOA operations and refusing lawful access to community representatives. The accusation was absurd, and several neighbors openly questioned her version of events, but Karen appeared convinced that once police arrived, the matter would end in her favor. About half an hour later, 2 patrol vehicles entered the neighborhood and pulled up near the gate. Karen immediately hurried toward the officers and began explaining her idea of the story. She pointed at me repeatedly while showing documents from her folder and speaking with absolute certainty from where I stood. I couldn't hear every word, but I could see the officers standing carefully and taking notes. The neighbors watched silently, unsure of what would happen next. When the officers finally approached me, I remained calm and answered every question. Honestly, I explained the situation, provided identification, and offered documentation proving ownership of the property. For a moment, it seemed the misunderstanding would be resolved quickly. But then something unexpected happened. One officer received information through his radio, and his entire demeanor changed. Within minutes, the conversation took a different direction, and before I fully understood what was happening, I was being informed that there was an active warrant connected to a complaint Karen had recently filed. The news stunned me. The neighbors were equally shocked. Karen, however, looked completely satisfied as officers placed me in handcuffs. She crossed her arms and watched with a smile that suggested she believed the fight was over. The delivery truck never even reached the property because the property scene had already become the center of attention for the entire neighborhood. People stood silently, watching as I was escorted toward the patrol vehicle, unable to understand how such a ridiculous situation had escalated so quickly. As the vehicle pulled away, I looked back one last time and saw Karen standing proudly beside the gate, convinced she had won. What she didn't realize was that the legal process she had set in motion was about to place every one of her decisions under intense scrutiny. Hidden within that process was a connection she could never have predicted, a connection that would completely change the course of the case and leave her wishing she had never started the fight in the first place. The ride to the station felt unreal. Only a few hours earlier, I had been standing peacefully at my own gate waiting for a delivery truck, and now I was sitting in the back of a patrol vehicle trying to understand how an HOA complaint had somehow turned into an arrest at the station. Officers processed the paperwork while I cooperated fully. The more questions they asked, the more Obvious it became that something about the case did not make sense. The allegations described me as an aggressive homeowner who had threatened HOA officials and obstructed lawful duties. Anyone who knew me would have laughed at the description. Even some of the officers seemed puzzled, because nothing about my behavior matched the claims in the complaint. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, Karen was reportedly telling people that she had finally gotten rid of the homeowner who had challenged her. Several neighbors disagreed. Many had witnessed the entire confrontation and knew the situation was nowhere near as simple as Karen was making it sound. Over the next 2 days, statements were collected, security camera footage was requested, witnesses were interviewed, and details began emerging that painted a very different picture from the one Karen had presented. Video recordings showed I had remained calm throughout the interaction. Witnesses confirmed that I never threatened anyone. Several neighbors even stated that Karen appeared determined to create a conflict from the moment she arrived. As investigators reviewed the evidence, serious questions started being raised about the complaint itself. Then came the court proceedings. Karen seemed extremely confident. She attended hearings with stacks of paperwork and behaved as though the outcome had already been decided. Every time she entered the courtroom, she carried herself like someone expecting a victory. What she did not know was that behind the scenes another development was quietly unfolding. The case had been assigned through normal legal procedures and paperwork was moving through the court system, exactly as thousands of other cases did every year. No special treatment, no interference, no shortcuts, just the standard legal process. Then one morning, Karen arrived at court looking more confident than ever. Neighbors who followed the story were present. Witnesses were ready, attorneys were prepared, everyone expected another routine hearing, but within minutes, something happened that completely changed the atmosphere. As legal documents were reviewed and procedural issues discussed, Karen learned the identity of a DGA connected to the court actions involved in the case. The moment she heard the name, her expression changed. At first, she looked confused, then surprised, then completely stunned, because the name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Moments later, she discovered why the judge whose authorization had been involved in reviewing critical legal matters connected to the case was my daughter. Karen's face went pale, not because anything improper had happened, not because anyone had manipulated the system, but because she suddenly realized something she had never considered. She had spent months assuming I was an ordinary homeowner, with no ability to defend himself. She had never imagined that someone in my family had built a respected legal career. The reality hit her immediately. Every action she had taken would now be examined according to facts, evidence, and law, exactly the thing she had been trying to avoid. From the beginning, the legal system moved forward, exactly as it should. My daughter followed ethical requirement expected of a judge. Procedures were carefully observed, any potential conflicts were handled appropriately, and the case continued based entirely on evidence. That evidence turned out to be devastating for Karen. Security footage contradicted major parts of her complaint. Witness testimony exposed inconsistencies in her statements. Documents revealed that several claims made against me lacked factual support. As more information surfaced, the story Karen had built began collapsing, piece by piece. Hearing after hearing, her explanations became harder to defend. Questions she once answered confidently now left her struggling. The neighbors who had watched my arrest were now watching something very different. They were seeing the truth emerge. Investigators eventually concluded that significant portions of the complaint had been misleading. Additional reviews uncovered procedural violations involving HOA conduct. The focus of the case gradually shifted away from me and toward the ACTs that had started the dispute in the first place. Karen could no longer control the narrative. The facts were speaking for themselves. Months after my arrest, the outcome became clear. The allegations against me fell apart. My name was cleared. The evidence showed that I had done nothing wrong. The same neighbors who watched me leave in handcuffs watched me return with my reputation fully restored. Many stopped by to offer support. Others apologized for believing the accusations, and more than a FEFW admitted they had always suspected there was more to the story. As for Karen, the consequences of her actions followed her long. After the case ended, her credibility suffered her standing in the commune. It changed, and the authority she had used to intimidate others no longer carried the same weight. The irony was impossible to ignore. She had tried to use the legal system as a weapon. Instead, the legal system exposed the truth. Standing once again at my front gate, I looked across the neighborhood. Thought about everything that had happened. The gate was still there. The house was still mine, and the accusations that once seemed so threatening had ultimately led to the very thing Karen feared most: accountability. In the end, she learned a lesson many people learn too late. Power can pressure. Rumors can influence people, but facts have a way of surviving everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. We bring you new stories every day, and your support helps the channel grow. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.